I'm aware that events have moved on since the first notice of motion was drafted. Is this likely to be withdrawn and debated around the one notice of motion?
So I'd like to keep it on the record, and I'm happy to take it with the other notice of motion separately, because this council hasn't had all the authority, hasn't there been a decision made by the authority, it should make a decision for the council by press release.
Okay. Are you on board with that, Stan?
So moving to that.
So we've got a second there. Okay. Okay. Is someone going to move the appropriate resolution then that we debate both of these very similar subjects together? Is that seconded? Is that agreed? Okay, can I call on the mover of the notice of motion around fire and rescue? Cuts. And seconder. Okay, so I call on Tom Hanson to open the debate.
Thank you. I'm not going to dwell on my notice of motion. The leader of the council has clearly and unequivocally stated that the land consent agreement is not available, but I would just like to make a few observations. I think it's a sad day for this council when the leader of the council puts himself in motion. While I welcome the council's review in not allowing the land agreement for development, I'm dismayed the way the leader of this council conducts its corporate business by press release. It shows a clear lack of respect for council officers and land relation matters. I would like to put on record how proud I am of the residents of Greasley who came together with one voice and clearly stated they do not wish to see a fire station in their village. Their tenacity and hard work is an example of people power in action. This is their victory and nobody else's. And let it be a message to this council that people have spoken. Do not allow any more development in the centre of Greasley. Mr. Mayor, the Labour notice of motion is yet another example of them blaming everything on the national government. Taking no responsibility.
Councillor Anderson, I just want to check on a statement you made. It would not be appropriate for this full council to make any pre-development decisions on any planning application that might arise in Greasley or anywhere else. So I would ask you to, if the sentiment of your vote is to try and encourage members of the planning committee to have a predetermination on development, and that's some legal advice on that. I just want to clarify that because you are in a public session. Would that be in order or out of order? Say it, please.
Yeah, I believe the representation goes so far an issue again, sorry,
As long as I keep you safe, Tom, okay?
Okay. No, I appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for looking out for me. The Labour notice of motion, again, I'll just repeat that, blames everything on the national government and it don't take any responsibility when in power locally. It was this council that initially offered the site to Merseyside Fire and Rescue Authority, and this council who did it for months, caused much anguish to residents before making this spectacular U-turn by the media. And if the leader of the council was so concerned about fire station measures, why did he remain mute on the subject until a couple of weeks ago? Yet again, it's an example of a Labour policy based on divisive party politics and not governing in the best interest of the people. Mr. Mayor, in their notice of motion, we see another example of Labour's selective amnesia. How convenient that they forget to mention that it was their own government who started producing fire authority budgets way back in 2004. Yes, for those interested in the facts, Mr. Mayor, this started in the Fire Service Rescue Act 2004, which has seen Merseyside Fire and Rescue Authority budget reduced year on year for the last decade. Interestingly, Merseyside Fire and Rescue Authority does remain the third most expensive in the country. I think fire station measures in the current climate are necessary, and I would encourage all elected members not to play party politics, but to work for Merseyside Fire and Rescue Authority.
reality is, as our motion very clearly says, Mr. Mayor, that in Merseyside, we suffered, fire authorities suffered, twice the average cuts of other fire authorities. And Mr. Mayor, why is it right that in Merseyside we lost 40% of our firefighters, but by comparison in wealthier Tory-controlled Shropshire, they've had an increase in the number of firefighters? Mr. Mayor, this is yet again another example of the Tory government imposing unfair cuts on areas in the north with Labour councils. It is really outrageous. But the reality is that no matter how many times we make the case, it doesn't look as though the government are listening, that they should not make these cuts. So therefore, I think we do need to be pragmatic. The fire authority clearly do need to balance its books, but I think it's not at any cost, and I think it was the right decision to withdraw this site from any consideration of the new fire station, and to extend the search in the wider Grimsby area, where the chief fire officer is clearly saying for operational reasons that's the area it makes sense to build a new fire station in. But I do hope, Mr. Mayor, that in the same way that we've taken the lead in listening to the people and not playing party politics, we can act in a sensible way in terms of finding an alternative site for what is clearly the right decision. I think as the chief fire officer said, this is the least best decision, but given the scale of cuts he's facing, I think it is something we should consider. So I would, I actually haven't got a problem with agreeing the Tory motion because it's very similar to ours. So I would, we'd be supporting that, and we'd also be moving our motion as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, if are there any other speakers? We've got Councillor Blakely and Councillor Gilchrist. We'll take those two first, okay?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like my colleague Councillor Anderson, I welcome the council views, spectacular views today. I welcome the fact that listening to people, I certainly hope he adopts the same approach and listens to people of North Western Silver Matty. Because let's face it, the leader of the council only withdrew this land in Grimsby when the head of asset management offered up a piece of greenbelt land in Silver Matty. Within 10 minutes of me having that conversation with the head of asset management, your press release was sent out. It was a disgraceful, political, driven, and I do hope, Mr. Mayor, it's a political decision. You know, I do hope. Mr. Mayor, I've not interrupted the council leader or my
Well, it's not a nice accusation to make of some sort of hideous deal was done when
I'm not saying that it was deal was done. I'm simply stating facts, Mr. Mayor.
well, please tell me when it's down or
If it will upset the council leader, I apologise, Mr. Mayor, I'll withdraw that. But it came to light to me that from the head of asset management that a piece of land had been offered up at Silver Massey, a piece of greenbelt land, and within 10 or 15 minutes, for whatever reason, a press release was sent out to say this is now neutral.
Yet again at a council meeting, and they were very well behaved and very well ordered in front of members of the public press, and officers' intentions or the like, you know, open and public debate when they have no chance, and we know that's the unfair fight, they have no chance to defend themselves as an officer. You're making a summation which may or may not be correct, but I do wish you would not entertain that type of politics. You have a political point to make, and please make it, or a genuine point to make, please make it, but let's not go back to some of the bad old days that this council has been in the past. Let's keep it about the subject matter, which is about whether a fire station should go in Grimsby centre or not. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, let me make it clear, I'm not attacking the council officers. I'm simply stating I am not attacking council officers. Council officers are tasked with finding what were alternative locations. They found the location. That location was never ever put into the pot in the first consultation exercise. It was never offered up to the fire authority from day one. Suddenly it's offered up. Mr. Mayor, I'll let people draw their own conclusions. I'll say no more than that. But I'll go back to saying I certainly hope the leader of the council listens loud and hard to people of Silver Matty and Northwood when they give the same message and Henning withdraws his land for whatever reason, whether he does it from the goodness of his heart or he does it for political gain. I really don't care as long as he does it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Nicky hits on the head there, don't we do care?
Right, moving on. Oh, I've got some more debates now. Okay, Councillor Gilchrist and then Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think probably the exchange that has taken place in the last 5 minutes serves to illustrate what I was going to say earlier. I think the issue is this, that there is a process to be followed. That process needs to be known to members. That process, wherever it is, needs to involve elected members at the earliest stage. It may need to involve elected members from opposition parties. And that's why I want to work back to the beginning as to how the site came to be offered and who authorised the site. And if it was done by officers, then there was a need for elected members to be informed. And therefore we need to establish a process that we can be as bullet-proof or criticism-proof or rumour-proof in trying to get this right. On the issue of Sorghum, I have no information on that, and therefore I'll see how that one pans out. But I believe the same principle should apply. If there's to be a further site, then the councillors in that area should be taken into consideration. They should be invited in to discuss the issues and try and reach a conclusion to put forward to the public. On the issue of Shropshire, I have no information either. But I did look back at the act that Councillor Thomas referred to earlier. And yes, there was a discussion going on with John Prescott and government at the time, and there was the introduction of a risk-based system. So that's the risk-based system that exists now. So you look at the risks and decide how long it will take to get somewhere and whether it meets the timescales involved. My reading as a Sheriff Fire Officer's reports was all about where is the risk-based system and can we meet times to get to key places. But if there is to be further development, if, for example, we have a new local plan that releases more land in the borough for development in certain areas, and if the golf resort were to be taken off, and if there were to be hotels in that area, and there's to be further development, then we need a careful overall look at it to make sure we do have services in the right place. After all, Total Place was invented by the last government in 2009 and 10 and said authorities should work together. And those were models we commended at the time, models that need to be in place now, as long as everyone has confidence in them and is involved in them.
Okay, Councillor Green, Councillor Rennie, and Councillor Dean.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you, like you can Mr. Mayor, I always try and take to task leaders when they start referring to themselves in the third person. So when Councillor Phil Davis welcomes the announcement of the leader of the council to withdraw the council, I think we're starting to get into a little bit of trouble, or maybe it's trying to all get into it somewhat. The main interest I have in this, of course, is as a councillor for West Kirby Bursars and the safety and security of the residents who live in my ward, and as a person, and care about wide, of course, in terms of we're a wide queue, so we've got quite a and so on. So my first interest is in the West Kirby Bursars ward, and of course, as you know, we currently have Big Fire Station. I think certainly attending these particular consultation events, I was particularly impressed by the Chief Fire Officer in terms of the process that he went through, the conversation that he had, and subsequently, of course, as well, after the Greensby solution was taken off the table. I think that's good. I think people listened. I think Chief Fire Officer listened. And I think it was clear that that site was going to be the right one. But I'm particularly moved by the situation around Broadway. When we talk about there's 2 minutes matter and so on. Well, clearly some of those issues have been brought to my attention, and I'm aware of them. It shows absolutely that 2 minutes can make a difference between someone living or dying when it comes to a house. And I genuinely hope people will approach that in that spirit, because I don't think anyone should be turning around and saying, that this
fire authority across three parties all agree that Merseyside is best served by fully trained, full-time firefighters. I've been fortunate enough now to be on the fire authority for a number of years, and I've probably been able to witness firsthand where we were 10 years ago to where we are now as a fire service for Merseyside. And clearly, most of our success in Merseyside has been built on the fact that we have put a huge emphasis on prevention. In other words, as everybody knows, 100,000 home fire safety checks in 1 year, something to be really proud of in Merseyside, and clearly that still continues today. So we don't attend as many fires or incidents as we used to 10 years ago, and thank goodness for that, and fire deaths have decreased accordingly. But what I do have to say on this particular issue is the fire authority, for those members of the Labour members here who are members of the fire authority, I think we would all acknowledge that we don't really try to get into the mudslinging too often, obviously, because you're tired of it with party politics, because what we are concerned about is the safety of the residents of excuse me, I am losing my voice, which some of you will be very confused. We are concerned about the safety of the lives of our residents and people who live in Merseyside. And what I would hope that all members of this authority have in their minds is clearly to keep that clear definition between what the fire authority has to make as a decision and what Wirral Borough Council has to make as their decision when it comes to a planning issue. The two are not related, even though it may feel to local residents that they are. They are not related. They are two separate issues which must be dealt with quite separately. But my greatest concern, as I'm sure the members of the Merseyside Fire and Rescue Authority will be, is to ensure the greatest safety of those people of West Wirral. And I will ramble to them. But clearly, none of us like the idea that we have to merge fire stations, but we are where we are. And again, we can stop mudslinging whose fault it is. And I've been lobbying to a Labour government, to a Conservative government for extra funding for Merseyside, and I will continue to do that. But we have to make savings. We are where we are, and the only way we can do that on Wirral is to offer a merger of a fire station. And mergers are closures, whichever way you look at it, but it's the best option that we have for Wirral. In Liverpool, it's not just a Labour-controlled fire authority saying to Wirral, this is what you're having because, we're the wicked Labour Party. It's not happening in Liverpool. Liverpool are having outright closures. We are not having outright closures in Wirral. We are being offered the opportunity of mergers. Excuse me. And the fire authority primary concern has to be the safety of those people. 26,000 people in the west of Wirral, Hoylake, West Kirby, Mells, their paramount safety has to be at the forefront of all we do. So I hope really that Wirral will obviously play their part in this as local councillors and members of the full council, but clearly please keep in your mind the actual result of the
Okay, thank you. Well, Councillor Hodgson who's indicated, and if there's no one else indicating, we'll move to the second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know the guilty is on, so this will be about 30 seconds. We're a little bit off track. Rather than Phil, you've said that you listen to public voice on it about local resident council, so about 500 people at the last count, or 1,000 people at the last count, and that's helped you make the decision, which I think is the right decision not to actively do. What I would like to bear in mind this week when at the cabinet meeting is that I actually put a petition of 4,600 names for the party, so I hope we keep in the same vein and listen to public opinion.
Okay, I'm going to call the seconder of the first notice of motion, which is Wendy Clarence. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I do welcome the opportunity to add my voice to the thousands of Shrewsbury who made their opinion clear about the possibility of a fire station there. And over the last few months, Mr. Mayor, I've learned a lot more about the fire and rescue service than I knew before, with the public meetings that were held and the in-depth consultation that was taking place there and information. As the local press made clear, the public meetings that we were very well attended, and you've seen tonight a petition of 3,000. And everyone who actually attended the meeting heard from the chief fire officer that the changes to the
I understand very strongly indeed in favour of Central Greensby, as their judgment was that it had the greatest merit, judged against response times and risk to the 26,000 Wirral residents who they serve. The service was looking to embrace a range of facilities 24/7, very much in accord with many people's wishes. And nevertheless, Mr. Mayor, we have listened and we have withdrawn the site. Whatever land is finally identified, Mr. Mayor, it's the fire authority as new owners who will in any case need to obtain planning permission. The planning process is quite straightforward. It's transparent. Residents will object and raise their objections to the council of all parties on the planning committee. The mere granting of planning consent is separate entirely in the instance of ownership, and that could only be agreed by the cabinet and ultimately by council. Now, having heard the depth of the local evidence against the Central Greensby site, our professional officers are identifying all other potentially available alternatives, and there can be no question, Mr. Mayor, of any council land being released until all these processes have been exhausted. And I think it is quite wrong of Conservative councillors to attempt to make political capital of this and to imply to the public that offers were made when they know very well it would be constitutionally impossible for officers to make offers.
It is a right to reply available, Tom. No, you've waived yours. Councillor Davis, who will use yours?
I mean, I can't not respond to Councillor Blake, please. I think Sir Neil chose commentary about the headings of management and to refute utterly the kind of accusation of any kind of collusion. The reality is that I issued a press release after my cabinet member had kind of reported back to me that the meetings in Greensby, and it was. Sorry.
Can you just
So I just want to put that record straight. I do hope, Mr. Mayor, in the other comment I wanted to make, that clearly we do need to widen the search and quite rightly, as Adrian said, other sites being identified. I do hope that members will resist the temptation to make political capital and that we can do what Jeff has rightly said, is put the safety and security of our residents number one priority in any future discussion about any of this.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Right, okay. We didn't make up the reaction to your speech. The reaction was generally felt, I think, by all members that you were straining into territory. So I don't share the real reaction and amplify it, okay? Councillor Daisy, you're not speaking in this debate now, okay? Right, moving on then. We now move to the vote. So we have the first notice of motion in the name of Councillor Anderson. All those in favour, please show. And that looks unanimous, apart from my abstention at that. Okay, sorry. Any other votes against? Any votes against? One vote against? And any abstentions, which is fine. Okay, so we go with that directly. Moving on then, if you don't mind. Moving on then, if you don't mind, is to the second notice of motion in the name of Councillor Phil Davis. All those in favour, please show. Okay, and obviously there will be those against. And any other votes such as abstentions? Abstention is 1 in myself. Has that been recorded? 41, 21 and 1 abstention. Okay, so that is the vote on that notice of motion. If I do a very short tap dance, we'll take us into guillotine.